So, hello there, and welcome back to another Nights of the Movies podcast. I'm Spark Knight, and in these podcasts, I like talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I am reviewing The Acolyte, the latest Star Wars Disney Plus show. So, let's get into it, shall we? The Acolyte. So I'm late to reviewing this series for two big reasons. Reason number one is the last few episodes of this series came out whilst I was on holiday. And whilst I was on holiday, I didn't have access to Disney Plus. I just couldn't get onto it. I tried multiple different ways and it didn't work. So I had to wait till I got home to finish the series. But reason number two that I didn't finish this series till last Sunday is because, and the reason I waited so long to review the show on this channel, is because I wasn't on the edge of my seat wanting to see how this story continued, wanting to see how this story concluded. Because as soon as I got back from my holiday and I had access to Disney Plus again, the first thing I watched on Disney Plus was The Simpsons. I turned on Disney Plus, I went to go and watch Acolyte, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to watch something else I think I'm going to enjoy more. So I stuck on some classic episodes of The Simpsons instead, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about my thoughts on this show. But last Sunday, as I've already hinted at, I did finish this series. And, well, just before I get into my thoughts on this show, I want to say this. Before this series came out, I was dead excited about it, like really excited about this series. I mean, the show was announced all the way back in 2020, and I remember when it was announced when everyone was in lockdown and there wasn't much news coming out, and this was one of the big pieces of movie news coming out, and I couldn't believe what I'd heard. Like, Disney had greenlit a show all about the rise and the birth of the Sith. That should be the other way around. The birth and the rise of the Sith. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, a Star Wars Disney Plus show from the perspective of the Sith. That sounds fascinating, and it quickly became one of my most anticipated Star Wars Disney Plus shows. But it was announced all the way back in 2020, and the show only came out this year. It came out in 2024, so clearly a lot happened behind the scenes, which changed the show. So then when the trailers came out, it made the show look like it was going to be from the perspective of the Jedi. Like, we were going to get some stuff about the birth and the rise of the Sith in the show, but it wasn't really going to be about that. It was more going to be from the Jedi perspective, and I didn't mind that because I still thought the show sounded really good from the Jedi perspective or the Sith perspective, or the Sith perspective. I loved the idea of setting a show 1,000 years before the events of The Phantom Menace, seeing the High Republic, seeing the Jedi at their prime, and then seeing why people would want to be a Jedi, tapping into our own instincts about why we as fans of Star Wars would want to be a Jedi, because I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to who have seen the Star Wars prequels and like, yeah, I want to be a Jedi now, and I thought this show was really going to tap into that, and also I thought the show was going to tap into the problematic nature of the Jedi, how they go to these planets and steal children, and the show does tap into that a little bit, but not too much, but I'll go into that in far more detail a bit later on in this review. But you get the point I was making. I love the idea of doing a show all about the Jedi and about the rise of the Sith. That's what I thought the show was going to be about. And although the trailers didn't wow me, I liked the trailers though, because they made the show like it was going to be a character-driven Star Wars Disney Plus show on the same sort of lines as Andor, which is my favourite Star Wars Disney Plus show and easily the best written Star Wars Disney Plus show so far. And I thought, if we're getting like Andor but with lightsabers, boy am I going to be excited. Boy should this show work for me. So, having finished the series now, about a month after it finished airing, after the last episode came out, here are my thoughts on The Acolyte. Honestly, I thought this show was fine. And I hate saying that word. I've said the word fine when I've been reviewing TV shows and films far too many times recently. I really hate saying things are just fine. I'm getting tired of myself saying things are just... The stuff I'm watching recently is just fine. I am sounding like a broken record, but it seems to be the case. So we're getting so much middling and forgettable content recently. So much middling, forgettable stuff is coming out, and I'm watching The Acolyte, and it's got so much potential, which I've already spoken about. Doing a series exploring the Jedi, exploring why people would want to be a Jedi, and the problematic nature of the Jedi, and how the Sith are rising because of the problematic nature of the Jedi. But the series doesn't really delve into that enough, and instead this series is all about these twins that I don't care about whatsoever. The twins are the least interesting characters in the show. I mean, there was something kind of interesting about them in the first episode, but then by the second episode I was like, yeah, I care about every single character in the show apart from you two. And as the show went on, sure, it had its moments. It had its episodes even. There were some episodes, I think about 3 episodes overall, I enjoyed in this show. But that's not good for an 8-episode TV series. Especially when each episode is about half an hour to 40 minutes long. Because the last 2 episodes of this series are about 40 minutes long. And you want every episode to be a banger. But it just wasn't. The series should have been so much better than it actually was. But it's got a plethora of problems. Way too many problems. And this is my least favourite Star Wars Disney Plus show to date. And I should say, if you enjoyed this show, that's great. I'm really jealous, because I wanted to look forward to watch this series every week. I wanted to absolutely adore this series so much, because I didn't love Ahsoka, which, if I'm correct, was the last Star Wars Disney Plus show which came out, and I didn't love Mandalorian Season 3. I enjoyed those shows, but I didn't love them, and I wanted to love this show. But I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I enjoyed those shows I just mentioned, you know. I wanted to love this show. I wanted to enjoy this show even so much more than I actually did. And if you did enjoy this show, I'm super jealous of you, and I don't want to take that away from you whatsoever. And I also want to say that I didn't dislike this show because of the diversity aspect of it. People who are just going on about the quote-unquote wokeness, or whatever you want to call it, that this show has... Get over yourself. We live in a world full of all these different types of people, and I think it's perfectly fine for them to be represented in the stuff we watch. So I don't care about the diversity aspect of the show, not whatsoever. But personally, I care about good writing, good storytelling, and I don't think this series had that. It feels like, and I keep saying this about the stuff I'm watching recently, but it felt the case here as well. It felt like this series didn't have a story to tell. It felt like they came up with this idea, let's explore the Jedi and the problematic nature of the Jedi, but didn't really have a narrative thrust and have a solid underlying story, underlying narrative that really made this show feel like it had a proper story to tell, because it has potential. There's some good ideas in there, but the writing is abysmal. It's pretty awful, and I hate saying that, but there were so many moments where like, oh, you're almost on the verge of doing something great there, but you just went away from doing something great, and you went with the predictable option instead. Like, this show is so unbelievably predictable, to the point that by the end of episode 1, I guessed what was going to happen with the twins by the end of the finale of this show. And I was 100% correct. So spoiler here, in case you haven't seen this series yet and you're planning to, but just haven't got around to watching it yet. Spoiler here, if you don't know what happens at the end of the show. I guessed that the twin who was working with the Jedi, the good twin, what's he called, Osha, at the start of the show, was going to turn bad, and I guessed that the bad twin was going to turn good. And although that's not, like, word for word, although that doesn't exactly happen, it pretty much happens at the same time. And I was like, oh god, you had the potential to do something actually quite interesting in the twin style. Maybe they'd just get away from the whole Jedi and Sith aspect of everything, but instead they just went with the predictable route. And like in the last episode, when you see Sol and Qui-Mate, the two best characters in this series, when you see them about to duel it out, and the duels in the series are fantastic, by the way. You know, give credit where credit's due. It's one of the reasons I don't hate this series, because it does have merit, and a lot of the merit is in the choreography. The choreography with the lightsaber duels in the show is genuinely phenomenal. But as good as the duel is in the final episode between Sol and Qui-Mate, by the time you get to it, I was like, well, I know who's going to win this duel. It's so obvious. I know what's going to happen by the end of this duel. And then it happened. Sol died at the hands of Osha, and Osha went to run off with Qui-Mate because she has a crush on him. And I'm like, what is this? Why can't we do something more interesting? Why couldn't Sol have survived and actually fought back against Osha? But instead he doesn't, and it's just like, oh, there's so much in this writing where it's so predictable, and I don't like that about it. And somehow, and that's just some examples, by the way, there are plenty more examples, but those are just the examples I can remember off the top of my head, because I watched the last episode recently. All the other examples in the first 6 episodes, which I didn't watch too recently, I pretty much forgotten about, because this show is so forgettable. And it has this thing about it where somehow this show feels too long and too short at the same time. I don't know how it does it. Like, each episode in the series, as I've already said, is about 30 minutes to 40 minutes long. Most of the episodes are only 30 minutes long, actually. And the episodes which are over 30 minutes long somehow feel shorter than the episodes that are under 30 minutes long, because most of the episodes, not all of them, episode 5 was under 30 minutes long, and I thought that was a banger of an episode. And I didn't mind episode 4, but and I didn't mind episode 1 either. I thought episode 1 had an interesting start to the series, had an interesting premise. But most of this series, so the episodes in this series are about 30 minutes long, and they feel slow. Not all of them, but a lot of the times when characters are just talking to each other and delivering lines of dialogue which are really cheesy and are not well written, it's slow, and there's not that much chemistry between these characters. And I get that we are following, for the most part, the Jedis in this show who are meant to not show much emotion. But at the same time, when you watch the Jedis in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, they have emotion when you see them outside of the Jedi Council. But here, you see them outside of the Jedi Council and the Jedi Academy and everything like that, and they just don't have that much emotion, and everything feels too slow. And yet, the show overall feels like it's gone by way too quick. Somehow this show, and I don't know how it did it, I really don't know how it did it, somehow it feels too slow and too fast at the same time. I don't get what was going on there. I do not think this show was well thought out in terms of its pacing. I do not think it was well directed, because I think some episodes have this breakneck pace to them, like episode 5 and like episode 7 did, in my opinion. But then some episodes feel like, really, we're just carrying on with this. Why has it gone on and on and on, and the episode's less than 30 minutes long, and it's feeling like it's gone on for an hour. Episode 3 I didn't like, and I zoned out so much in episode 3 that by the time the credits started rolling on the episode, I didn't even realise the credits had started rolling. It was like a minute into the credits, I was like, wait, the episode's ended? I was too busy thinking about something else. And I found that I was zoning out too many times watching this show. And that's not that, you never want to have that with anything you're watching, a film or a TV show. You don't want to zone out something you're watching because you're not that interested, you're not engaged by it. But I wasn't engaged by so much of this series, and I felt that the episodes were way too short and sometimes way too slow at the same time. Like The Bear, quite a lot of episodes of The Bear, which are about 30 minutes long. But those episodes of The Bear move at a pace and have something about them. Whilst this series, when it has these 30-minute episodes, for the most part, it doesn't move at a pace, and it's slow, and I hate using this word, but it is true when it comes to this. They're boring. The episodes which are slow are often boring to watch, and the best episode of this series, in my opinion, is episode 5. But the reason I liked episode 5 so much was because of the choreography and the duels in that episode. I thought it was thrilling and exciting to watch because it had some of the best lightsaber duels I'd seen in anything Star Wars, period. But I feel like I only liked that episode because of the dueling, not because of anything else. And I want to take more away from that episode. And I feel like the writing, it touches on some interesting ideas, but it doesn't really delve into them. It doesn't really explore why people would want to be a Jedi and the problematic nature of the Jedi and the rise of the Sith, which I thought it was going to explore in so much more detail. There was so much about this show where I thought, you had the potential. This is a Star Wars Disney Plus show about Jedis. And yet, you somehow made it boring. Jedis, which are the coolest characters in the galaxy. Somehow you made a show about them boring to watch. You know? And there's so many other problems that this series has. For instance, you want to stick on the Jedi stuff for a sec, this series has a Wookie Jedi in, a Wookie Jedi, which is something which I never knew I wanted until I saw him in the trailers for this show. And he should be your coolest character. He should be the K2SO of the Acolyte. He should be the Yoda of the Acolyte. I mean, yes, Yoda was about during this time period in the show, and spoiler here, he does make a very, 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 very brief cameo appearance at the end of this series. And I said very like 5 times there because it's like the tiniest cameo ever. But, you know, he does make a cameo in this series. But the point I'm making is the Wookiee Jedi should be the coolest character in this series, and he only gets one duel. I mean, come on! The Star Wars fan in me wants to see him go wreck shop like Darth Vader did at the end of Rogue One, but we don't get that in this show. The Wookiee Jedi feels like an afterthought. And again, spoiler here because you haven't seen the show and I'm talking about spoilers. I didn't think I'd talk about spoilers as much as I have been doing, but here we are. In episode 4, I think it's episode 4, yeah, you see that the Wookiee Jedi has been killed, but you're like, I'm sorry, they killed the Wookiee Jedi remarkably easily, because you'd think the Wookiee Jedi would be the coolest character ever, would it be a menace when he gets a lightsaber, but apparently he dies pretty easily. And I was like, God, you waste the potential of the Wookiee Jedi. Which doesn't sound like a big thing, but in my opinion is a big thing, because usually the alien characters in the Star Wars universe, or the droid characters, are often the most fun characters to watch. And I thought that was going to be the case. Like, when they teased the Wookiee Jedi at the end of episode 2, I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited to see how he's going to be used in the rest of the series. And then I'm like, I finished the series and I'm thinking, what was the point of having a Wookiee Jedi if only to have one fight with him and barely give him anything to do? What was the point of the Wookiee Jedi? Don't get that whatsoever. Again, it sounds like a small thing, but actually, I think in the grand scheme of things, it represents a lot of problems that this show has. Again, it has so much potential, but it's just wasting all that potential. And this won't sound like a big thing for many people, but it was a big thing for me. And that is the musical score. I didn't think the musical score for this show was particularly good. The musical score is by Michael Abels, I think that's how, I think that's what the composer's name is. And he hasn't worked in the Star Wars universe before. He hasn't composed anything Star Wars before this. And I thought the score he did for this show was fine. Again, I'm going back to that word. Fine. But it was nowhere near as good as it could have been. I don't understand why so many of the new composers working in the Star Wars franchise now want to get away from John Williams' classic Star Wars themes. Like, in this show, we're following the Jedis. So, we're gonna hear... You'd think you're gonna hear the Force theme, Bom, bom, ba-da-dum, bom, 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 bom. But we never hear that once. And we see the Force being used a multitude of times, and we never hear the Force theme. I think it's a hint at that once, and I'm like, why are you getting away from using the Force theme? Why can't we hear those classic John Williams themes from the Star Wars prequels here? Or why aren't they hinted at? And Kevin Kline did that a bit in Ahsoka, so it's not all the composers that are getting away from the John Williams themes, but it seems like most of them are, and Michael Abels' score for this show didn't sound like Star Wars to me. It sounded like it was a good score. There were parts of the score which I really liked, but like the first time you properly see Qui-Mane in the show and he floats down from the shadows, I'm like, oh wow, the score's really working here. But there are other times when I'm like, why isn't the score more thrilling, more exciting? Like the score during the duels between each character in episode 5 was lacking. And I saw someone had, basically edited the Duel of the Fates theme, the theme that plays during Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon and Darth Maul's duel in The Phantom Menace, over the duels in episode 5 of the show, and it was so much better because it was John Williams. And I understand not every composer is John Williams, but you can still incorporate some of these themes. John Williams' themes for Star Wars, his most popular themes, his most iconic themes from Star Wars, are iconic for a reason. And I think getting away from those pieces of music, getting away from using the Force theme in a show all about Jedis is not a good thing. I don't understand why they didn't use more John Williams music in this show. They need to touch on his music more. They need to stop getting away from it. It's not just Acolyte which is doing this. The Mandalorian did it as well. The Mandalorian's been doing it as well. And Obi-Wan did it a bit. Obi-Wan still had some classic John Williams themes here and there, but not nearly as much as it should have. And there are other examples, but here it was really evident to me because the score was lacking, and I felt that Michael Abels' score didn't really work for this show. It didn't really encapsulate the feel of the show, in my opinion, and I felt no need to listen to the score on Spotify for this series whatsoever. And after each of the other Star Wars Disney Plus shows ended, I went on Spotify and I listened to the score for each of those shows. But I have not felt the need with checking out the Michael Abels score to this show. And that sounds like a small thing. I can understand why many people probably wouldn't care about the score to a Star Wars Disney Plus show. Probably wouldn't care about the music too much. But if you've been watching my Star Wars reviews on this channel recently, you will know how much I care about Star Wars music. I dedicate about 5 minutes, at least 5 minutes, in my Star Wars reviews on this channel, talking about my thoughts and my feelings on the Star Wars music for each particular Star Wars movie in those reviews. And I was hoping the Acolyte would have this score which just perfectly encapsulates the feel of the show, has some of those classic Star Wars prequel themes in there, but also has some new themes, some new distinctive themes about it. But it doesn't. I couldn't tell you or sing or hum any of the new themes that were composed for this series. I thought the musical score was really disappointing, as was so much of this show, and I was I was really hoping I was at least going to like the score a lot more than I actually did. But yeah, the musical score did not work me with this series. You know? And another thing which didn't work for me in this series was the story that was told. I've already spoken about the story a bit, but I'm going to speak about it again here. And this review is a bit all over the place. I do apologise, by the way, but I am recording it on what feels like the flipping hottest day of the year right now. Honestly, I'm sweating buckets right now. So I'm a bit all over the place with my thoughts, but you know, bear with me. Something which did bother me about the story was that it wasn't really about the Jedi and exploring the good things and the bad things about the Jedi. It feels more about it's all about this twin storyline. I've already spoken about this. I didn't like the twin storyline, and so when you get to reveals, quote unquote reveals, because they're not really reveals, not really anything that you're going to be shocked by that happen later on in the series. The reveals feel lackluster and don't really work. Like, when I was watching the series, I think it was in episode 7, I was like, I was thinking, I feel like Finn in Star Wars The Force Awakens when he says to Rey, why does everyone want to go back to Jakku? I was watching episode 7 of this show, of The Acolyte, thinking, why does everyone want to go back to Breadnock? Is it called Brendock? Is it called Breadnock or Brendock? Doesn't really matter. Why does everyone want to go back to Brendock? Because nothing really happens there. And throughout the show, the build up that something big happened on Brendock, and you get to episode 7, and I'm like, okay, some things did happen there, but as soon as episode 7 finished, as soon as episode 7 of The Acolyte finished, I couldn't help but think, wouldn't this have happened already with the Jedi, though? Like, how is this the first time this has happened with the Jedi? Why is this being built up to be this big thing? Because it's not really a big thing that's happened. I mean, there's a couple of interesting things that happen in episode 7, but nothing particularly that memorable. I'm like, is that it? Is that the thing you've been building up to? And episode 7 just took me out of the pace of the rest of the series, because by that point, I'd already got far more interested in Sol and Quaimir, and those are the two most interesting characters in the series. In fact, I would say they're the only two interesting characters in the series, because all the other characters are really not that interesting. I mean, I liked Jackie, I think that's what the character's called, played by Daphne Keane in this series. I liked that character, and I liked the character Yord, but I got a feeling I liked those characters because they actually had a bit of personality about them because of the actors' performances. I don't feel those characters were well written and well realised. Like, I know nothing about Jackie or about Yord whatsoever. And they were in about, spoiler here, they did die in episode 5 of this show, but they were in 4 episodes. And I know they're going to have a comic written about them or a book written about them, which is coming out sometime next year. But I don't want to have to read a book or comic to understand the motives of a character in a TV show. Tell me in the TV show. Just tell me in the thing that I'm watching, and the thing that I'm spending my time trying to get into, telling me about these characters. But this show didn't do that. Jackie and Yord, I enjoyed watching those characters because I enjoyed the actors and their performances. But I felt like the characters were really not well realised in the show, apart from Sol and Quaimir. But even Quaimir, who I thought was a really interesting character in the second half of the series, even he, I could tell that the actor, what's the actor's name here? Just get up. Should have planned this far ahead, but I didn't. One sec. Get the casting up. Manny Jacinto. I could tell as soon as Manny Jacinto showed up, and I think it was episode 2 of this series, I could tell that he was going to turn out to be the Sith straight away. I liked exploring that character in the second half of this series, but I felt they could have added more of a mystery around it, or maybe not make it so obvious, because it was pretty obvious it was going to be him, because we hadn't met any other characters apart from Vanestra, who it clearly wasn't, because she was in the Jedi Temple and everything when all this stuff with Quaimir, this Sith, was happening, when he was doing all of his stuff. So it clearly wasn't going to be Vanestra. I think that's what the character's name is. So it was so obviously going to be this character played by Manny Jacinto. And when that reveal happened, I was like, yeah, okay, I saw that coming. And again, I liked that character, but I could see where the twist was coming with him from a mile away, from quite a few miles away, from about 20 miles away. I'm like, the biggest thing for me is with this series, is I just found it dull. And it reminded me of the feelings I had, or the feelings I have, should I say, when I rewatch Attack of the Clones. And I never want to have those feelings when I watch a new piece of Star Wars content. Like, I spoke about it at length when I reviewed Attack of the Clones on this channel. Attack of the Clones is my least favourite Star Wars movie because I find it incredibly tedious to watch. And the feelings I have when I watch Attack of the Clones came back when I was watching The Acolyte, which is not what you want from this piece of Star Wars content. I mean, I wasn't getting quite as angry. Actually, no, I wasn't getting angry, though. Like, when I watch Attack of the Clones, I get angry at what I'm watching. I get annoyed, and I'm like, why is this happening? What's going on here? I was like, what was that line of dialogue? But I didn't have that with the show, because I didn't have that much invested in it. You know, I hate to say it, but for once, I understand why people are hating this show. I mean, I don't understand why people are hating it just for diversity reasons. I think that's completely and utterly stupid. People who just hate this show because they think it's woke need to get over it. But at the same time, you know, I can understand why people who actually have fair criticisms, who dislike this show because of the writing, the directing, the storytelling and everything like that, I can understand why they're disliking this show and why they might hate it, why so many Star Wars fans feel disappointed by the show. And I feel disappointed by it, but I don't think I feel quite as disappointed as some people. I don't think I hate it because I never really got into it. It sounds like after episode 1 people actually got into this show. Or maybe I misinterpreted the Star Wars pundits I was watching online after episode 1 came out. Like, after episode 1 of the series came out, I went online and I was watching all these Star Wars pundits, seeing what they, hearing what they thought of the show. And a lot of them seemed quite interested to see how this series continued. And I was interested, but I wasn't invested. And I think that's why I don't hate it. Why I don't really dislike it that much. And I just think it's fine because, yeah, it's got bad writing and, you know, it's not a well-done TV show, in my opinion, but I haven't got that much invested in it, so because it's turned out badly, I haven't been that bothered about it, if you follow me there. I'm not sure how much it made sense, but I suppose what I'm saying is, this series didn't make me care too much in the beginning for me to get invested in everything going on, and therefore I haven't disliked it. I haven't had this disdain for it the same way other people have. And I understand why other people have, because they probably had a lot invested in the show. They thought a show all about the High Republic, which is this big thing in the Star Wars fandom. Finally, we're going to get what we've wanted, but I don't feel the show was that. It's not really about exploring the good and the bad aspects of being a Jedi and the rise of the Sith. I mean, that is explored in this show, but not nearly as much as it should be. And really, it's all about this thing that happened on Breadnock. Is it Breadnock? It may as well be. It's such a silly name for a planet, and that's a nitpick anyway. This thing that happened on Breadnock, whatever it's called, and trying to get these twins back, or making sure one of these twins. See, this is how much I care. I couldn't even tell you what the twin storyline was actually about. I couldn't tell you what the main narrative of the show was actually about. All I could tell you was, it's not really about the Jedi. It's not really about the Sith. And I'm like, what's the point? What is the point of this show? I've seen all episodes and I still don't get it. And I am disappointed by this series because it had so much potential. And it just feels like another thing that Disney Star Wars has done wrong. And I say this as a fan of the Book of Boba Fett. I enjoyed watching every episode of that show. I don't care what anybody says. Had some big problems for sure. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show. I enjoyed watching the Ahsoka TV show. And I enjoyed Mandalorian Series 1 to 3. And I loved Andor. But I can understand why people are having problems with these series. Especially people who are just casual Star Wars fans. And I feel like this is giving those Star Wars fans who just seem to hate on everything Disney Star Wars ammo. And I hate that about this series. Hate that about it. That's the one thing I hate about the series. I hate that it's not good because it gives Star Wars fans another thing to complain about. And us Star Wars fans, and I include myself in this, you know, how long has this review been going on for? How long was my review on Attack of the Clones, which was just me ranting about that movie endlessly? Star Wars fans are the worst because we just complain and complain and complain when something doesn't work. That being said, you have to admit, this show did have some perks. And I think anybody who says otherwise hasn't watched the show properly. This show did have its merits, alright? You know, I've already spoken about it briefly, but I'm going to speak about it in more detail here. The duels in this show, the lightsaber duels, are some of the best lightsaber duels I've seen in anything Star Wars, period. They are thrilling to watch, and the choreography is perfection. It's so well done. I loved episode 5. You know, episode 5 of the series, which was just basically one big epic lightsaber battle. I started that episode about 7 a.m. in the morning, and I was like half asleep going, okay, here we go, another episode of Acolyte. I finished that episode, I was like, wow, that was great. That was so much fun to watch. You know, and I thought the duels in the other episodes, like in episode 7, in episode 8, the finale of the series, and I think there was a duel, there was like a hand fight that was really well done as well between two characters in episode 2. So yeah, I think all the choreography in this show was incredible. That was actually the thing that I found most engaging. Not the storytelling, which is never a good thing. If they don't find the storytelling engaging, then you're not going to find the show that engaging, and you're actually going to find it quite boring, like I did. But the thing I did find most engaging, the thing that kept me watching, and the thing which did entertain me in some parts, was the duels, and was the lightsaber duels and the choreography. I did feel that was well done, and I did find episodes 3, not episode 3, sorry, I didn't find episode 3 entertaining, but I did find episode 5, 7 and 8 to be enjoyable to watch. I have big problems with those episodes that I'm not going to get into now. You know, maybe one day I'll do a big deep dive into all my problems with Acolyte, but I don't think I will actually, because I think even I would tire myself doing that, and it'd probably be too painful to do. But even though I had some big problems with those episodes, and not really episode 5, but I had some big problems with episodes 7 and 8, I still enjoyed watching them. And I enjoyed watching episode 1. You know, I didn't mind the fact that they killed, what's her name? Carrie-Anne Moss, who played Neo in The Matrix. I don't mind that they killed her in the first scene. I actually thought that was quite brave of this show, to cast somebody who is this icon of 90s cinema, you know, because of the Matrix movies, cast her in a role which everybody thinks is going to be huge, and then kill her in the opening scene. I mean, she was in some other episodes, because this series does include some flashback episodes. Or they're not really flashback episodes, actually. They're more episodes set in the past, but you do see her again. But to kill her in episode 1, I thought was a very brave move, and I really liked that. And I heard a lot of people complain about that. I was like, no, I thought that was well done. So yeah, I thought they did make some brave decisions, or maybe just the one big brave decision, but I thought it worked. And I did find episodes 5, 7 and 8 to be entertaining, and I do want to reiterate that, you know. I didn't mind watching certain episodes of the show. I didn't think it was a painful watch overall. Some episodes were painful to watch, but others weren't. So give credit where credit's due. Also, I did like that they didn't just use the volume for this series. Like, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the volume is used on the production of such other previous Star Disney Plus shows as The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, and Acolyte. And it's I'm oversimplifying here, but it's basically this big VR set. And it's fascinating to see it being used in the behind-the-scenes documentaries on the making of The Mandalorian and the making of the Book of Boba Fett and whatnot on Disney+. But I do think it has been overused in the previous Star Wars Disney Plus shows we've had so far. And they didn't use it, according to Leslie Headland, who is the showrunner on the show, they didn't use it at all in this series. They shot on real locations and in built sets, and you can tell, and I loved that. I didn't realise how much I'd been missing that until I watched that in the show. Like, when they're shooting on location, the locations look beautiful, like truly gorgeous, and the sets look lived, in my opinion. I loved that they used real sets for this show and they filmed on location. It makes me think now, why don't they just do that with all the other Star Wars 60 Plus shows? I don't understand why they don't, it saves money to probably shoot in the volume and it saves time, but I really hope now that future Star Wars 60 Plus shows, because Andor didn't do this but the other ones did, so Andor notwithstanding, I hope the other future Disney Plus shows, Star Wars Disney Plus shows, use, sets more and actually shoot on location more, because I didn't realise how much of a difference that makes. Because even so I didn't care about the writing of this series, when there'd be a piece of dialogue and it's on this beautiful location, I'm like, yeah, I don't care about what you're saying. I think this location you chose to shoot this moment in this episode is actually quite something to look at. So I did admire that. Plus, I did like the world building in this show. I mean, apart from Coruscant, which you kind of had to see in this series, you got almost, entirely new planets explored in this show. And something I hear a lot of people criticising in newer Star Wars content is that we don't have enough world building. The Star Wars galaxy no longer feels like a galaxy. But I actually think this show did a great job at the world building, at expanding on the Star Wars galaxy and making the Star Wars galaxy feel like a Star Wars galaxy. We get to see plenty of new planets in the show. Now, I wish we got to see some more new planets for sure, but I did like the world building for the most part, and I thought that was well done. That was another big positive from the show, in my opinion. Plus, David Harewood shows up in the final episode as this senator who's criticising the Jedi. And I was like, wow, where's this guy been? He delivers lines like he's out of Andor. Like, he comes in, I'm like, you are delivering lines better than anybody else in this series. I thought he was great in this show, and I didn't understand why he wasn't in more. Like, I don't understand. What was the reasoning behind that? What was the reasoning to only include this character in your final episode? I didn't get that, but I loved him in the final episode, and I wish we got more of him. I thought he was great, and I did feel the show overall had decent performances. I mean, saying that, I did feel some performances were lacking, but I did particularly like the performances with the one who played Sol. What's his name? I'll just have a quick look here. Lee Jung Jae. I thought he was really great, and I liked the character Sol, and I wish it was explored more, because I really wish it was explored more, because by the end of the series, I kind of got the feeling he was actually quite creepy. And I didn't like that about him. But, for the most part, I thought he was an interesting character, and I wish they explored that character more. Same with the character Kwai Mia. I mean, they left a lot open with that character. They hinting they had a bit of a dark past, and he was trained by Vanestra, one of the other characters we see in the series, but I didn't feel they explored that character enough. Still, I thought Kwai Mia was probably the most interesting character in this series, and as already briefly spoken about, I did enjoy the performances from Daphne Keane. Daphne Keane was awesome in the show as Jackie, and I liked the character Yord. I liked a lot of the characters in the show, just not the main two, just not the twins. Although I did think Amandla, what's her name? I just had it up on Google there, I have to check it again. Amandla Stenberg, I thought she was really good in the show. I just didn't like the character too much. So yeah, I thought the performances were good to great. I thought some were definitely better than others. And I found two characters really interesting. I wish we got more of David Harewood. Furthermore, you can clearly tell that a lot of time and effort has been put into the series. And there are some aspects of the episode, like in the last episode, there's this space battle, which I thought was one of the most visually dazzling space battles we've had in a Disney Star Wars show, period. So there is things to admire, and I think anybody says otherwise, anybody says this is just an awful show, a completely and utterly awful show, hasn't really watched it, hasn't given it credit where it's due. Because again, give credit where credit's due, this series had its moments. It's just a shame that the bad outweighs the good. Because, as I've already said about five times now, this show is really about these twins. And the twins are the worst characters. Because Osha, the main character, she sees her apparent old and best friends, Jackie and Yord, brutally die at the hands of Quimit in episode 5. And yet, in episode 6... she doesn't care about her best friends brutally dying at the hands of this guy because she's seen this guy get naked and she finds him attractive. So she's forgetting about her old friends and actually she's going to go and join the Sith. And I'm like, what? What? Do you not... That's annoying. And the more this series went on, the more I disliked Osha and the decisions she was making. And May, who is the quote-unquote evil twin at the start of this series, she's all over the place. Like in episode 4, at one point, she's committed to learning the path to the Sith. And then, and I'm not joking here, watch the series if you don't believe me, a minute later, she's like, actually, I'm done with this Sith. I'm going to go and hand myself into the Jedi, tell them everything I've done, and hopefully they believe me. And then, about 5 minutes later, in the same episode, she's like, actually, no, the Jedi are all surrounding where I actually am, in this little cabin, but I'm not going to go and give myself up. I'm going to hide from the Jedi. I'm like, what is your... Make your mind up. Her character's all over the place. And that doesn't stop after episode 4. It continues into episode 5, into episode 6, into episode 8. And I'm like, make your mind up, May. Make your mind up with what you actually want to do. Do you want to be good? Do you want to be bad? Whatever you want to do, just decide. That's why I don't like these characters too much. And overall, for me, the biggest thing... Oh, the other big thing with the show, like I've already spoken about, the biggest thing for me, the biggest thing with my disappointment with the show was that it wasn't really about the Jedi, which I was hoping it would be. But my other big disappointment with this series is it didn't feel like Star Wars enough. It didn't feel like the same Star Wars world we see in the prequel trilogy. And I don't mind there to be some new elements introduced. I don't mind that. And I do think here and there you get some of that Star Wars world you see in the Star Wars prequel trilogy in the show. But you don't get enough of it to the point that for me, this series did not feel like Star Wars. It didn't feel like I was watching a Star Wars show. It felt like I was watching a sci-fi TV show that happened to include lightsabers, aliens which looked like aliens I'd seen in the Star Wars stuff I've seen before, and some great costume design, but it did not look like Star Wars enough to me. And apparently the budget for the show was around $170 million, which is more expensive than films like Dune 2. And I may not have enjoyed Dune 2, but that film, visually, is incredible. And this show was not visually incredible. Like, In the Star Wars prequels, say what you will about those movies. I spoke about them at length on this channel. I have my big problems with the prequels, for sure. But something you cannot say about the Star Wars prequels is that they don't feel epic, because they do. Whenever you see the Jedi Temple in the Star Wars prequels, there were halls, there were thousands of Jedi walking these huge temples. And whenever you see the Jedi Temple in the series, it's limited to a couple of rooms. And I'm like, where is the grandness of all of this? Is that even a word? Why does this not feel more grand, is what I'm saying? Why did this feel more like the Jedi Temple that we saw in Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith? Why does it look like the Jedi Temple if it was in a TV show? And the simple answer is because this is a TV show. But I feel like even the previous Star Wars Disney Plus shows that have been criticised heavily still have this epic quality to them. Like Book of Boba Fett, I don't care what anybody says, I enjoyed that show. And I reckon if I go back now and rewatch it, I'd still enjoy it. I haven't rewatched it since it first came out, but I reckon I would still like it. I remember watching that show when it was coming out and looking forward to each episode, and it did have this epic quality about it. Same with Obi-Wan, which a lot of people don't like. I felt that series was epic, especially in that duel between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader at the end of that series. And I felt like Andor was epic. I felt like The Mandalorian series 1 to 3 were epic, but this show wasn't epic enough. It didn't feel like a Star Wars show in its scale. So much of it feels like a TV show, and I never felt that way with any of the other previous Star Wars Disney Plus shows. God, you can see I'm sweating buckets, by the way, can't you? Oh, I didn't realise how much I'm sweating till now, but you get the point I'm making. It feels like a TV show, and I don't like that. And for a show which has a budget of like $170 million, which is, I think, twice the budget that Obi-Wan had, it feels like the money went elsewhere. It didn't go to what was being produced on screen. Like, I love when a show or a film has a big budget, and you see that big budget when you're watching the show or film, that has the big budget. But I didn't feel that with this show, and I wanted to. But I do wonder where the money went. I can understand if this show had a budget of $100 million, but 170? I mean, that's a movie budget, and I don't know where the money went. I really don't. And we need to get away from doing half-an-hour episodes. Like, I think in other TV shows, it's not a big issue. Like The Bear, as I've already spoken about, The Bear, one of the best TV series airing right now, one of my favourite TV shows ever, has half an hour episodes, which are an absolute banger to watch. But the half-an-hour episodes in this series, it's like, somehow they don't really work. And they need to get away from doing half-an-hour episodes and need to focus on doing good 40-minute episodes which actually explore the ideas that these shows are setting up. Because this show does set up some interesting ideas, but like what I said, somehow the show feels too long and too short at the same time. And I'm not sure I've already mentioned this, but looking back on this show in retrospect, I actually reckon this show might have made a good first film in a trilogy. Cut out all the stuff which drags, tighten all of the writing up, and take out all the unnecessary stuff, because there are some very big unnecessary stuff in this show. Take out all of that and make episode 3 and 7 into one section of the film. Yeah, tighten everything up, and I reckon you'd get a good first film in a trilogy about the Jedi at their prime and the rise of the Sith. And I feel that would have been so much better. But instead, it's an 8-episode TV show, and I'm not sure why it exists. It didn't feel like Star Wars to me. And I don't think that was just in the writing and in the feel of the show. It didn't have enough of the feel of Star Wars to me. I feel that was also in the music. And I think that there was so much wasted potential because the writing was not nearly as good as it should have been. The story and the way it was told was not nearly as compelling or as engaging as it could have been. The characters were mostly lackluster, and the story, like, that was told, I don't get the point of it. Like, what was the point of this series? Because it was not nearly as emotionally impactful as I think Disney thinks this is. You know, this series feels emotionless, and I wanted to have this emotional engagement with the show like I had watching Andor, but I didn't. And I really just feel, in the end, it was one big disappointing missed opportunity. Not without its merit, for sure, but not nearly as good as I was hoping, and not nearly as good as it really should be. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that The Acolyte, I'm going to say it's a 4 out of 10. Usually when I just think a show is fine, I give the show a 5 out of 10. Like, I watched Deadpool and Wolverine recently, I gave that film a 5 out of 10 because I just thought it was fine. But with this show, I thought it was fine. But it had more negatives about it than it had positives. At least for me. And I want to reiterate, if you did enjoy this show, I can't tell you how jealous of you I am. I really can't, because I want to love everything Star Wars I see. But I didn't love this show, and that's fine. Hopefully I enjoy the next Star Wars City Plus show. What's it? Skeleton Crew, that comes out later this year. I can't wait for that show. Hopefully I find it just at least enjoyable to watch, because that will be enough for me. You know, I don't need the shows. I don't need every single Star Wars City Plus show to be like Andor, like some people do. And I don't also want them to all be the same, have the same standard of writing as Andor do. Like, Andor is one of the best pieces of written Star Wars content ever. But I also enjoy when Star Wars content is just a bit silly and a bit fun. You know, I'm one of those people who enjoy parts of the Star Wars prequels. I love the original Star Wars trilogy, and I enjoy the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and I love Rogue One. That's what I said on this channel. I think Rogue One is the best Star Wars movie since Return of the Jedi. So I'm one of those people who doesn't care about the silly aspect of Star Wars too much, and I don't mind if not every TV show is on the same standard of writing as Andor. Would I like that? For sure, but it's impossible to happen, because Tony Gilroy, who was a showrunner on Andor, doesn't write every single Star Wars TV show. It's not the showrunner on all these Star Wars Disney Plus shows. So I don't mind that some Star Wars Disney Plus shows are just enjoyable. That's enough for me. I don't need everything Star Wars to be perfect, you know? But I do want Star Wars to be exciting, to be thrilling, to make you feel like you're watching a piece of Star Wars content, to actually feel like it has a story to tell. And I didn't feel this show had that. I didn't feel the show had any of those things that I just mentioned about it. You know, it didn't feel like Star Wars enough to me. Yeah, you got the lightsabers in there, but you need something else. You need more in the score and the musical score to actually make it feel like Star Wars. You've got to have those, for lack of a better phrase, Star Wars-isms about it to make it feel more like Star Wars. And I think this show had a lack of an epic scale to really make it feel like it was, like it had a place in the Star Wars galaxy for me personally. And I feel like I've just lost my train of thought. But the point I'm making is, in the end, I've been going about The Acolyte way too much, and I am sweating buckets right now, and I do not think the best in the heat, so I do not know how this review has turned out. But in conclusion, The Acolyte didn't work for me as a whole. It had its good elements for sure, But it was one big disappointment because it was a show about the Jedi. And it had the opportunity to tell us why the characters in the Star Wars galaxy would admire the Jedi, would want to be a Jedi. And it also had the opportunity to explore the problematic nature of the Jedi and how the Jedi's ignorance let the Sith rise. But it didn't. And yeah, I feel because of that, you had a show which didn't really know what it wanted to be, didn't have a good story to tell, focused on twins that were really unlikable and the least interesting characters by far, and a show as a whole which was pretty forgettable. Again, not awful in my opinion, it definitely has some awful elements about it, but not awful in my opinion, just really, really, really disappointing. You know. And that's pretty much my thoughts on Acolyte as a whole. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Acolyte... Can I get my red light? So no, wrong one. No, switch off. Didn't expect the little rating bit here to go this way. Will give me a sec. All in all, I'm going to say that Acolyte... I'm going to say that it's a 4 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen Acolyte, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comments section below. Maybe you loved it, and if you did, again, I'm dead jealous of you, and please let me know why you loved it in the comments section below, or maybe you felt similar to me. Whatever your thoughts are on Acolyte, please let me know in the comments section below. And as always, thanks for watching or listening to this podcast, and if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. I look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As I've already said, thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast. And I suppose this is it. So I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.